Thanks very much. I'm Martin Rowe, one of the trustees of Greenbelt, and I've been responsible for hassling John for the past few months until the point at which he just couldn't decline any longer. And we were very fortunate in that this weekend he's been speaking at Oxford University, and he won't be speaking on this subject here because this subject was the epistemological imagination of Meister Eckhart. But it's fine, he's not speaking on that. He's a scholar, as some of you know, he's a poet, he's a mystical writer, and he's a best-selling author. You can find all his books in the bookshop, and tomorrow morning at 11:15 he'll be signing books. Tomorrow morning's session with John is much more interactive. It's really down to you to bring along your questions and have a conversation with John, which is why today he'll speak, but there won't be questions at the end of the session. And while I remember, John's new book is called Benedictus, and it comes out in November, and it's a book of blessings. So, I would like you to give a really warm welcome to the very, very wonderful John Donohue.
Good evening, and it's lovely to be here again. I'd like to start off my talk with a poem that I wrote several years ago, and it's a poem of blessing. And I'd like to read it for all of us and for absent friends as well. There's one Irish word in the poem, which is the word corach, and a corach means a canoe. So, Bannacht. On the day when the weight deadens on your shoulders and you stumble, may the clay dance to balance you. And when your eyes freeze behind the grey window and the ghost of loss gets into you, may a flock of colours, indigo, red, green, and azure blue, come to awaken in you a meadow of delight. When the canvas frays in the corach of thought and a stain of ocean blackens beneath you, may there come across the waters a path of yellow moonlight to bring you safely home. May the nourishment of the earth be yours. May the clarity of light be yours. May the fluency of the ocean be yours. May the protection of the ancestors be yours. And so may a slow wind work these words of love around you, an invisible cloak to mind your life. I always think that behind every face there is a secret life, and that humanoids are the strangest creatures that you'd ever meet, because so much is contained inside the human body. And I often thought that in the very beginning, that the winds went silent and the oceans became still the first time that the human face appeared on earth. Because I think it's one of the most unusual things in the world is a human face. And that on such a small canvas, such a variety of presence can appear. And behind every face, there is a secret, hidden inner life. And the amazing thing is that each of us is known by our face. We've often had the experience of being in a supermarket or in a street somewhere and seeing somebody from an angle or from behind and saying to ourselves, God, that's Cynthia or Mary. And then going right up to them and suddenly they're turned around and they're wearing the wrong face. So our face is that by which we are recognized. But the really strange thing is that none of us has ever seen our own face. And when I was writing this, it really struck me how strange it is that none of us have seen our own face. I mean, we've seen images of it in windows and in mirrors. but mirrors are notoriously untrustable. Some mirrors exercise a cruelty that is practically unthinkable in the reflection that they throw back to you. Others are kinder and softer, but at the end of the day you can't trust them, but you've never seen your own face. So I always think that that is an incredible incompletion in us. And in a certain sense, it's actually the opening for friendship and love. Because if love means anything, or if friendship means anything, it means that in the presence of the other, you begin to see who you are in how they reflect you back to yourself. And there's this individuality and solitariness in life as well. If somebody said to me, what's the thing that would amaze me most in the world? Well, the thing that amazes me most is that the whole thing is going on. I love Leibniz's phrase, which said that the real mystery is not that things are the way they are, but that there is something rather than nothing. And then the second thing that amazes me is individuals. That no matter, like even in this crowd of humans here, that there are no two humans that inhabit the same world. We all inhabit the same world physically, but internally, each world is completely different. So no one else sees the world the way you do. No one else sees it from the perspective that you do. In no one else is the same narrative building as there is within you. And even though similar things have happened to you as with other people, the context that they find in your heart and mind and narrative is different from everyone else. So actually, when you think of it like that, and the fact that your mind is hidden, this is the coolest thing of all, I think. No brain surgeon has ever opened the cranium and discovered a nest of thoughts nesting somewhere. Because thoughts are not visible. So actually your inner world is completely hidden from all other humans. And this is, I often think, one of the magic things about Samuel Beckett as a playwright. That he actually shows us how far away we are from each other. And how difficult it is sometimes to find the bridges towards each other. And the heart of what I want to say to you this evening is this. Is that no one else can look out for your inner life but yourself. There was a psychologist that I really liked, a Scottish psychologist called R.D. Laing. He wrote amazing books. But in one of his books called The Politics of Experience, he said, we never see another person's experience. All we see is their behavior. But you never see another person's experience. So in a certain sense, if you don't look out for your inner life, nobody else can. And one of the great tragedies I always think of life is that people live in this private inner world, but they usually take all their furniture for it from outside, from other people. And like to put it this way, this is an experiment or a little kind of suggestion I often make to humans when they come to listen to me and become my victims for an hour, is that I often say to them, everything you do is guided by thought. And it's a very interesting question to ask yourself. And the question is this: what are the 7 thoughts that govern, shape, and determine my life? It takes a long time to find them out. What are the 7 thoughts that you keep secretly coming back to? Because every day you're using thought all the time, whether you realize it or not. And the world that you inhabit and see is shaped by the way you see it. And the way you see is shaped by the way you think. So if you really want to change your life, the best way to change it is to change the way you think. I know people who've wanted to change their lives by changing their work, their partner, their friends, the places that they live, what they did, all the rest of it. And usually what you find is they only end up becoming more the same as they were before. Whereas in actual fact, if you change some of the furniture in your inner world, in your mind, then you really change your life. There was a friend of mine in Connemara who was principal of a school. And the motto he had for the school, which was a beautiful motto, was, "The mind altering alters all." The mind altering alters all. So it's an interesting thing if you have some time on your own in the next few weeks, or if you're writing a diary, to take out an empty white page. It's the best mirror ever. And ask yourself, what are the 7 thoughts that shape my life? You might only get one the first time you chance it. Then it might take you weeks or days or whatever to get the 7 thoughts up. But when you get them on the page, then you get a secret look, or a look into the secret way that you understand things. And when you've got the 7 thoughts written down, leave them alone for a week or 2. And then take another page some other day and say to yourself, because I was so faithfully married to these 7 thoughts, what were the 7 other ones that I didn't even flirt with or have an affair with? And then you begin to get a look at what you have excluded and avoided, and places that you've never even thought of going in your heart or mind or spirit. I used to be a Catholic priest for I think it was about 19 years. And one of the great privileges of being a priest, there was lots of unprivileged things, which were kind of not so oxygen-y. But there were lovely things. And one of the real privileges was when you'd be at a deathbed and helping humanoids to leave the earth. And it was an incredible privilege. There's no place like a deathbed, except a birthbed. And in a certain way, the deathbed is a kind of birthbed. Henry James, the wonderful American novelist, said that nothing makes a person feel so alive as to witness another die. Elias Canetti, the Austrian Jewish writer, said, the reason we're happy at funerals is because they're not our own. Which is kind of cool. But the thing about helping someone to die is that usually people are so surprised that was it. And the loveliest place to be is if you're helping someone to die who has really lived their life. Jeez, it's a great place to be. One time I was helping a bandito to die, a kind of rogara, a bochel. He wasn't sinister but he really was wild. And he was old. And I had done all the magic with him, put the sins whistling, and I had put on the holy oils and everything in him. And then it was time for off. So I said to him, I've done everything I can do for you now, and you're on your way. And you've just a little while. And he said, yeah. And I said, what would you say about the whole thing now that you're about to leave it? And this big roguish smile crossed his visage. And he said, by Jesus, he said, I knocked a hell of a squeeze out of it. And the next thing, in 2 minutes, he was gone. And I was saying to myself, as the Americans say, what a way to go. To say that I knocked a great embrace and squeeze and hug out of my life. And I've seen other people die. And I have seen their deathbed being a place of the most tragic, lonesome, forsaken regret. People who never lived the life that they desired, postponed it, allowed themselves to be beset and contained by other people's expectations and their own anxieties and uncertainties. And always were waiting for a future time to enter their lives and inhabit them, and never did. And suddenly it was the evening of their death, and their sad, lonesome eyes looked back on a life that they had squandered while all was meaning to get into it. And like an exercise that somebody told me about one time that I thought was a wonderful exercise in terms of just wakening yourself up a bit was to try to imagine the view from your deathbed and see what you'd like to see. Think of what you'd like to see that's not yet there. And think of what you wouldn't like to see that's there now and maybe needs to be transformed. Because the thing about it is the whole journey is so short. A friend of mine said to me there about 6 months ago, "What is it that haunts you?" And I said, "I can tell you exactly what haunts me now. It's the sense of my days running through my fingers like the finest sand, and I can't stop it." I remember when I was studying in Germany, I came back one time and I used to have a German car. And I was outside Galway one evening and this fellow was hitching a ride. So he sat in and he started talking broken English to me because he thought I was a German. So he said, "How are you? Are you enjoying Ireland?" And I said, "Very good." And he said, "What do you do?" And I said, "I am a philosopher." And he said, "What is philosophy about?" And I said, "It's about the meaning of the life." And I said, "What do you think the meaning of the life is?" And he said, "Jesus, I don't know," he said. "I'll tell you one thing, though," he said. "I'd love to put in a 60-year piece between the ages of 20 and 30. Which I thought was a great old spake, you know. But because the whole thing is going so fast. And one of the sad things about humans is that very often we almost have to be on the edge of losing a thing before we begin to either see it or value it or celebrate it. I've often seen that with people who were working so hard and so meshed into their lives they didn't know they were on earth. It was just bed work back again. And then suddenly an illness hit and all the webbing got cut and suddenly they were on their own and they got a new look at their lives and they woke up because they began to think. Not in the way that René Descartes thinks. You know, Descartes' cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. Somebody was telling me this joke last week that Descartes goes into a bar and he's having a pint of beer. And when he's almost half down to the end of the pint, the barman says, "Monsieur Descartes, would you like another pint?" And he said, "I think not," and disappeared. So, one of the things about trying to, I think another way to state what I'm saying is, one should try to live so that one can die very honourably. And at one's deathbed, you should be able to look back and say to yourself, well, what I dreamt of doing, I actually tried to do. Whether it worked out right or whether I did it the right way, that's another question. But I didn't stand on the fence or sit on the fence and become a kind of exile in my own life. I actually entered it and got right into it. Van Morrison, the Belfast mystic, says in one of his songs, "If you live the life you love, you will get the blessings from above." And I really believe that. I think that life is the great sacrament. And if we get into it, it looks after us completely. Being raised a Catholic in the west of Ireland some years ago, it was a time when sin was all over the place. Now nobody talks about sin, but then there was sin every corner you turned. And there was catechism stuff, and I often think now it was like kind of Catholic rap, you know? Like, what is an occasion of sin? An occasion of sin is any person, place or thing that entices you to sin. Now you could zap it up a bit and you'd have a rap kind of thing. So there was sin everywhere, but what they never told us was that one of the greatest sins was the unlived life. And that nobody can convert you into your own life but yourself. And one of the useful things to look at is to see this is what I think sin is. I think sin is woundedness that keeps you stuck and paralyzed in hungry, anxious places. And then poison comes from you that's destructive of others. In the Christian tradition, many of our theologies of sin always dealt with the symptoms, never with the causes of it. And somebody whose heart is contented and who's at peace in their own lives, they're not causing destruction right, left, and front and centre. It's always the inner disturbance that causes outer disturbance. And the fellow I was talking about this weekend, Meister Eckhart in Oxford, I mean, he believed that totally. He believed if you didn't get it right in here, that the rest of the stuff never worked outside. And I think in our times that there is a huge invitation to awaken your heart and your mind. Like, people draw all kinds of distinctions between people. People who have money, people who don't. People who are gifted, people who are not. People who are beautiful looking, people who are not. For me, the crucial difference between people is whether a person is awakened or not. Because an awful lot of people, if you give them a comfortable pillow and look after this middle section with foodosis, they'll sleep their way through most of it. Honest to God. I remember doing a thing with psychiatrists in Scotland a few years ago, and there was an old psychiatrist there. And I said to him, what would you say about the human person after all your years in psychiatry? And he said to me, people only change, he said, when the prospect of not changing is more painful than to change. And I think that one of the things about this Greenbelt Festival is that it would be lovely if it could become a threshold for you to do something completely new and different in your life, either in terms of thinking or in terms of your presence. And I always think that when all the talking is talked and the doing is done, that everything depends on the integrity of individual presence, the integrity of your own presence. It's lovely to sit in front of a person of integrity. They don't have to be all holy, holy and pious and have a religious sop in their mouth every time you hear them. But it's nice to sit in front of someone who is themselves. And I always think, to put it in technical terms, that's the ontological duty of the human subject, is to be who you are. And an awful lot of people expend huge energy in trying to become someone else, or to pretend that they're someone else. And like, the energy that goes into trying to be putting on a face on things is just unbelievable. So the relief of being able to just slip in to who you actually are and to live the life that your heart wants. One of the lonelinesses in the world is that so many people are in positions of work that they're just dreaming. Their whole life is an imprisonment, and they dream of getting out of it. Or people are stuck in relationships that are so dysfunctional that even a reincarnated, highly Ferraried Sigmund Freud wouldn't get them out of it. And they still stick in there. It's an interesting question about humans, like, why do we hold on with such commitment sometimes to that which robs us of spirit and makes us utterly miserable? Because one thing that the Christian message should tell us is that we deserve happiness, and above all, we deserve creativity and the challenge of becoming all that we could become. And in this part of the talk, I'd like to say that I think that the amazing thing about the human person is the possibilities for change within us are absolutely endless. Years ago, I wrote 15 sonnets on the structure of the rosary, and this is the one on the Nativity, and it's really about transformation and birth. The Nativity. No man reaches where the moon touches a woman. Even the moon leaves her when she opens deeper into the ripple in her womb that encircles dark to become flesh and bone. Someone is coming ashore inside her. A face deciphers itself from water and she curves around the gathering wave, opening to offer the life it craves. In a corner stall of pilgrim strangers, she falls and heaves, holding a tide of tears. A red wire of pain feeds through every vein until night unweaves and the child reaches dawn. Outside each other now, she sees him first, flesh of her flesh, her dreamt son, safe on earth. I think that one of the things that has been neglected in the Western tradition is the imagination of God. We've heard about the will of God, and people have crucified themselves and hammered their beautiful awkwardnesses into submission, trying to do what someone else thought was the will of God for them. And to be honest, I don't think the will of God is that interesting. Whereas I think the imagination of God is absolutely fascinating. In medieval scholastic times, they used to have huge arguments about whether God had to create or not. And I always think God had to create, because otherwise he'd be in some divine lunatic asylum if he didn't express the plenitude of possibility that was within him. So if we are made in the image and likeness of God, that means that each of us is a natural creator, and that each of us should awaken our imaginations. And a lot of people say, they'd say, sure, it's all right for the likes of you, you're interested in imagination, writing and all the rest of it. I have no imagination at all. Or I'm not artistic, as they say. I don't believe that at all. I think everyone has an imagination. And there's two arguments I'd use in support of it. First argument is that we're all, no matter how respectable and serious humans look, everyone is a next baby. Right? You wouldn't think it, looking at some people, that they started off like that. But actually we all did. So when you were a child, you lived in an imaginary world. When your mother or father said to you, don't go over that wall because there's a monster or something there, Jesus, you'd people the whole thing with a whole plantation full of monsterial possibility. So you were always, kids live in amazing worlds, the stuff that's gone on in their heads. Just incredible possibility. So each of us lived in that imaginative world. That was the heart of Romantic poetry, of course, Wordsworth and all these people saying, the child is father, mother of the man or the woman. That's one thing. And the second reason that we're all imaginative is that each night while you sleep, you dream. And even the most respectable, serious, solemn, severe, scrupulous humans are up to incredible things, often unspeakable things in their dreams. Sometimes after where they've been, it's quite an achievement to turn up for breakfast. So a dream is a sophisticated, imaginative text that you send to yourself each night. And one of the interesting ways, if you don't want to go therapy in yourself, one of the interesting ways to begin to do a bit of work on yourself is to pay attention to your dreams. And the trick is this, I learned this from somebody, is when you dream, when you wake in the morning, when the clock goes off or whatever, don't open your eyes first. Keep your eyes closed and try and just get the tail end of the dream. And then if you just get two fingers on it, you'll pull most of the thing back and then just note it down. The Talmud says that a dream that is not interpreted is like a letter that has not been opened. And if you're sending yourself these letters every night, it's kind of only courtesy to call around sometime and to kind of pick them up. Because you will, if you keep an account of your dreams, get a great sense of who you are and what's happening. And like in folk traditions, especially the Indian tradition in America, they really charted their future according to the symbols that came in the dreams. So your dreams are very wise about who you are because they come from your subconscious, not from your controlled surface mind. So if you feel that you're not that interesting and that you might be a little touch boring and that nothing of major significance has happened to you for a long time and you get a little bit anxious, shift from your day life towards your night life and have a look there. and you'll find immense sophistication and passion happening in your dream life. So if you can dream, if you're a former baby, then you can imagine. And one of the most interesting ways of getting a look at who you are is through doing a bit of writing. I just want to throw out this suggestion. Maybe 2 people in this audience will do it, but it's worth it for 2 people. An awful lot of people now that I see in the land of the free and the home of the exceptionally brave do what's called journaling. And you see them with their journals and they're filling them up with every thought that comes into their head. And like most of it, the state coroner wouldn't find a pulse in it. So the recommendation I'm making is buy yourself a really beautiful notebook, a really lovely notebook that you like taking out, and give it a title that excites you. Like last Lent, I did that for myself, and I called it a Lenten diary, severe views in the hard mirror, to try and get at places where I was stuck myself. But you could call this book The Diary of My Most Dangerous Thoughts, or things that occurred to me that I could never tell anybody, or strangenesses I have known. And keep it for unusual thoughts and watch the way it builds up. Because in our contemporary world, it's very hard to find places where you can show your heart. And I think that a diary, a creative diary like this, is a place where you can actually talk to yourself. Because there's an awful difference between thinking a thing and writing it down. Because in the act of writing it down, something totally changes. And the thing becomes part of yourself. And if you have the diary of your most dangerous thoughts, make sure you show it to nobody. Just keep it private and let it build up its own density and resonance. Because one of the things in our culture that's very difficult is to find someone you can talk to. One of the reasons that therapy is taken off all over the place, I don't know, was it Freud or Jung said that the Irish were unpsychoanalyzable. And I think it's kind of half true, insofar as these things go. But now it's breaking out all over the place. And I have no problem with therapy, If you're in trouble and you're entangled and you find a good therapist, you're blessed. Because a person like that will educate your fingers and show you how to disentangle yourself. But a lot of it is an expression of a great loneliness that is at the heart of postmodern society. People want a best friend or someone they could talk to. And then to bring creativity and imagination into this, what I want to ask is question that I find interesting to ask is, when was the last time that you had a great conversation with someone? A conversation that sang in your mind for days and weeks afterwards. It's an interesting question. Because an awful lot of what passes for conversation in our culture is merely intersecting monologues. And there's no real conversation. Because in real conversation, you can be taken to places you never expected. You can overhear things from yourself that you never knew you had in you. And you can absolutely change in a great conversation. It's like pure nourishment for yourself. And this is one of the beautiful gifts of friendship. And if you have a friend that you can have a great conversation with, then you should do that often. And regardless of where they are, you should go to see them so that you can talk to them and be with them. Because I think in that you find new dimensions of yourself that in your normal day-to-day life nobody even suspects. It's amazing how familiar we become to each other. And I always think that one of the real difficulties in a relationship is to kind of keep the crust of familiarity from forming over it completely. Gabriel Garcia Marquez, the great South American writer, in a book of conversations with Pedro Mendoza called Fragrance of Guava, was asked about his relationship with his wife Mercedes. They've been together all their lives. And he said, I know her so well now, he said, that I haven't the slightest clue who she really is. I think that's a great statement. And I think that in friendship and in really good conversation, that you get a chance to make a clearance in order to allow the other person to emerge as who they are in their otherness, in a safe space where they won't be assaulted with either expectation or judgment. And that's one of the things that friendship should be. Friendship and love should be safe spaces of clearance and healing and possibility. Because one of the lovely things about the imagination is that it's the great friend of possibility. I used to always think that facts were the coolest things. And I was studying in Germany, learning German in Berlin, and I was staying in the same house as a great philosopher of science from India, Gerhard Pandit. He was a friend of Karl Popper and all these dudes and dudesses. And I remember one day we were walking down the street in Berlin, and I was saying to him, aren't facts amazing things? People who are doing philosophy tend to talk like this. So he said, facts are really interesting. He said, but possibilities are far more interesting. And I said, really? He said, yeah. And then I began to think about possibilities, and I realized that they're the name of the game. Because all facts are children of possibilities. The possibilities come first. The person to read on this, if you really want to do some Olympic training with your mind, is Immanuel Kant in his Critique of Pure Reason. But you'd really want to feel that you need to be punished to do that for yourself. But anyway, so this is the trick now to put this is simple, abbreviated stuff. Say you have 10 possibilities, a cluster of possibilities, and they're just possibilitying away there among themselves at the possibility disco. And then one of them becomes a fact, right? It rises up to become a fact. Then that's the one that gets all the attention. But the really interesting question to ask is, what happens to the other 9 possibilities that never made it into fact? Where do they hang out? And that's what interests the imagination. The imagination is always interested in that which is not attended to, but which is always present. Like putting it existentially in another way, I believe that we're always confronted by different possibilities and we make choices. So choice is always about loss in a way. So say as a baby, you made a choice. I think babies make huge decisions. Like I love the American comedian Stephen Wright, and he said, I kept a diary as a baby. Day 2, still tired after the big move. My 2nd birthday, my age has doubled in a year. If this keeps up, I'll be 90 by the time I'm 6. Stephen Wright, I really recommend him. He's the best comedian. Like another thing he says, we've just put a new skylight in our apartment. It's driving the people upstairs crazy. And I'll just leave you one last one with him. He says, I'm having the experience of amnesia and déjà vu together. I think I've forgotten this before. But, so you've all these possibilities as a child. I think very soon after we hit the canvas of the earth, we get a very fast read, a survival read on where we've landed. What the other creatures, the bigger creatures are like, and what we need to do. So, say as a baby you were confronted with 6 possibilities and you chose number 1. Then when you were in childhood, about 7, you were confronted with 3 possibilities. This time you chose 2. Say in the middle of adolescence when you were in the hormone forest and it was very Einstein, space, time, everything and queering, and you were confronted with 2 possibilities. This time you took the first one. Say then when you were 20 and you met somebody that you really fell in love with, you had 5 possibilities. This time you took 4. When you were 40, you had 3. This time you took number 3, So all the time, the person that you are here this evening is a result of key choices that you made on thresholds that you've probably now forgotten. And you chose along the way until you chose your way into this life now. And that's why you're who you are. But the interesting question in relation to possibility to ask is, what happened to the other lives that you never chose? Where are they? I think this is a really fascinating question. And I have an old suspicion that that time isn't just linear, but that it's also a spiral thing. And I feel that the lives that we never chose actually move along with us. And maybe that's the secret of when we die, is that we only finally get to leave the world when these forgotten lives have also somehow realized themselves. I love that line in John's, I better say a couple of holy things, seeing that you're all holy people. But it's true, Jesus, when I hear the hymns, I was there thinking of imagination, I listened to all these hymns and I said, get holy. But to say a holy thing, one of the lines that I've always loved in the New Testament is in John's letter, where he says, one day you will know as you are now known. And that's a very cool sentence, because it means that right now you are being known by God. And that knowing is always accompanying you. And that one day, when you cross the old threshold and go into the death thing, you'll meet that knowing coming towards you that'll say, Jesus, how are you, John? And you look at the knowing and you'll say, God, you're my knowing. You're the knowing the way I was known. And then you'll suddenly realize that even the most profound knowing that you had of yourself was just a little wisp in the wind compared to the knowing that the divine has of you. And like I was saying, that God is the great imagination, and I think that's true. And I think we're made in the image of likeness of God, which means we're meant to create as well. So to sum up what I've been saying, it's like this. Every time you're creative, you're on holy ground. Because you're actually deepening, extending, and realizing creation. And that's where I think the beauty of God comes in. I think that there is a wonderful danger in God that we have totally forgotten. Because one of the things that humanoids like to do is they like to bring in the tamers, the theology tamers, to tame their deities down. They don't like the idea of a wild God, because it could get very awkward and deeply embarrassing. So the respectability of theology, confession, all the rest of it comes in and makes the God nice and palatable. The colours are inevitably pastels. The music is nice and low, like the schlocky music that you hear in supermarkets. And that could be just the odd little beep when you realise, God, there is a God somewhere out there behind the whole thing. And one of the reasons that so-called young people, which are a strange kind of species anyway, are leaving religion is that because God has died for them, or become incredibly boring and uninteresting. And I think that one of the tasks of our time for those who are interested in God is to make God dangerous again. And the best person I know who does that is the fellow I was talking about in Oxford this morning, is Meister Eckhart, the 13th, 14th century mystic. He is unbelievable, just unbelievable. And I'll end up by just telling you a couple of things about him. One thing he said is, nothing in the universe resembles God so much as silence. Nothing in the universe resembles God so much as silence. Then he says, God is that wilderness in which each one is alone. He also says, and this is lovely about yourself, you know, I think one of the greatest gifts that anyone can have is a contented heart. I think no one else can give it to you. But you can have all the world has to give. But if you're not contented in your heart, it's only tormenting you and making you completely kind of miserable. And there is, I believe you don't have to get a peaceful mind or a contented heart. I think there is a native tranquility within each of us that's already there. And through quieting your mind and your heart, you can slip right down into it. But one of the things, like in Ireland, when you'd ask somebody a question, you'd rarely get a straight answer. Do you know that kind of way? Be going around a bit, around, like you'd be saying, you know, how are you doing? Sure, I'm not too bad. How are you? Irish, I was often worse. Then it kind of goes, no information has been communicated. It's true, like, we're experts at this. It's dancing. But, like, when I went to America first giving talks, Jesus, I got an awful shock. Because I suddenly discovered if you put too much sincerity into the question, how are you? You could unleash a biography in seconds. You get levels of information that you'd be wondering if their partner even knew this. And it's just always striking me, Jesus, I'd be saying to myself, why would there be? I'd be cringing, like, getting this. And then you'd often be sitting in old workshop things, like, and you'd say to someone, who are you? So they'd tell you what's called telling your story. This is coming to Ireland now too. It's probably in England as well. So you tell your story. What's your story? So you give your story. And you'd often be sitting in a group of people, maybe with a woman with a really interesting face. And you'd say, God, she's an amazing face. And then you'd hear her coming out with a cliched, second-rate version of a story about herself that would put cornflakes to sleep. And you'd be saying to yourself, Jesus, how is she on something? Like, is she on automatic? Like, this kind of, totally. And what often happens, you see, is that people reduce identity to biography. And if they have a story, or if they think of telling the story, then that's who I actually am. But in actual fact, your identity is infinitely more complex, nuanced, sophisticated, and mysterious than your biography, or than anything that could ever unfold in your biography. And part of what I'm saying this afternoon is that one of your duties, which only you can do, is to imagine yourself. You're not simply there. You don't look in the mirror and it looks back at you and it says, John, 34523, blood cell, bum, bum, bum. Tells you nothing about who you are. There used to be a Zen monk who used to go to the mirror each morning when he got up and he'd say to the mirror, who are you? Then he'd look again in the mirror and he'd say, who are you? Then he'd look in the mirror a third time and he'd say, who are you? Then he'd wink at the mirror and he'd say, well, whoever you are, don't let them fool you today. Because the who question is the really magic question about who you are. And the point I'm making is no one else can tell you that but yourself. And if you don't have a sense of that, then you're on sand and not on ground. And I think one of the beautiful things about a relationship with God is that it gives you your own ground. Like when I was a child at home, people would say, you know, standing up for yourself, the way it was put was, they'd say, stand your ground. Stand your ground. Or you know, when you meet somebody who has no grounding at all, they're like a personal domesticated vortex. You feel if you came too near them that you'd actually go like straight in. And it's lovely and so wholesome then to meet someone who can stand on their own ground and who is themselves. It's just really because you can trust someone who is themselves. Whereas somebody who's picking a bit of pastiche out of a bit of pastiche there and a bit here and a couple of sentences from the latest lingo and showing you a face, you don't know whether you're standing in front of a lioness of Malaysia or a mystic from Connemara. You haven't a clue. So part of integrity is to imagine yourself honourably. And integrity is also related to integrated. That the different complex dimensions within yourself have the invitation and the possibility of coming together and meeting each other. And I think that the beauty of belief in God is that your concept of God should be feisty and imaginative and rich enough to incorporate all the hungers of your heart. An awful lot of people are going around, you know, with the concept of God that they learned at 10 or 11. Everything else in their life has grown, and their little concept of God is like something out of a lucky bag. And it's so awful, like. Especially fundamentalist stuff, like. It's just unbelievable when people get tar macadam put inside to lay down the autobahn for the fundamentalist thing. It was really interesting. I probably offend people by this now, but I don't mean to offend anybody. Really, I don't. But in the little village where I live, nothing happens before 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning. It's just Newtonian time instead of the Einstein model. And especially on Saturday, it's even a bit later. But one Saturday morning, I heard this knocking on my door at 9 o'clock. And I thought one of my neighbours was having a cow calving or that there was some trouble on the farm. So I went down to be confronted by these two humans who were dressed in a beautiful collar and tie suit, the male one, and the human female was dressed in a very elegant kind of two-piece thing. And I said, 9 o'clock in the morning in downtown Wilderness, Connemara, two perfectly dressed, corporate-looking people appear. And I was saying, Jesus, what's up? Then the man said to me, we'd like to have a conversation with you. And I said, what? And the woman said, we'd like to have a conversation with you. And like I was living on my own, doing all kinds of thinking, and I said, God has smiled upon me and send me two interlocutors that are going to push me to all the horizons I need to go to. So I said, you want to have a conversation with me? The man repeated, we would like to have a conversation with you. So I was just about to bring them in and felt so lucky when I noticed protruding from the woman's handbag a magazine called Watchtower. And I said to myself, aha, you are a sister and brother of the great Jehovah, I said. She said, yes. And I said, you really don't want to have a conversation with me. And he said, but we really do. I said, you don't. They said, we do. I said, you don't. They said, we do. I said, you don't. And I said, I'll tell you why. I'm a trained theologian, I said, and I know I said, you're already watching me with the last 10 minutes now. And you know exactly from your kit of scripture quotes the ones that you're going to use to nail this creature. But I said, I'm kind of handy enough at scripture too, and I can do tennis as well. So if you come in like, we'll be back and forth, we'll use an hour to be squandered and nothing will happen. Because I said, when I was in university, I used to try and have conversations with your brothers and sisters. And it always ended up as a pure kind of monologue. And then they kind of looked at each other and said, maybe we don't really want to have a conversation with you. And off they went, you know. But the point about the fundamentalist and all the stuff is like, I never realized how deep fundamentalism goes until I was at the University of Memphis one Saturday morning for a round table on spirituality and fundamentalism. And there were a couple of people there who had been caught in the fundamentalist thing. And the job that they had to try and reframe and reweave and retrieve their lives. And my fear is this, is that as our times become more apocalyptic, become more and more apocalyptic, that there is going to be a greater rise in fundamentalism. And it's an answer to nothing. It's based on the invention of a past that never existed, the creation of a false nostalgia for that past. And the thing that let's not say I can't stand, but the thing I find rather difficult about fundamentalists is they won't keep it among themselves. They want to tell everyone about it, like. And you'd love if they all went off to an island and just fundied away together, like, and their fundamentalist thing, but they want to nail everybody. So the last point I'm making is that I think in the Christian tradition, there is a huge resource in relation to God. A massive, rich narrative of who God is. And Meister Eckhart is one of the people that's done that. And I'll leave you with something disturbing from him. He says, in Mittelhigh German, Mittelhochdeutsch, Gott wird und Gott entwirrt. That means God becomes and God unbecomes. So what he's saying actually, which is kind of really make you draw your breath, is God is only our name for it. And the closer we come to it, the more it ceases to be God. And yet if we go towards it, we will inherit every blessing and healing that we need. And when the time comes for us to lie down to die, We will be able to look back on a life that took honourable risks, that pushed its own frontiers, that tried to look after its own healing and exercise a psychological hygiene that didn't let stuff spill out over other people that had nothing to do with them, that was compassionate and didn't judge, and that tried to look after the poor and the neglected and the unspoken for. Like me, I mean, we're very privileged people. And I was down in the car with a wonderful woman, Sabina, who works on the whole poverty thing, and she was giving a talk on the whole poverty thing. And I always feel that we're so privileged, and an old sentence that I have on the Eternal Echoes book, which I think is not a bad little sentence, even if I say so myself, because I think there's an awful lot of weak sentences, but this sentence is kind of good, and it was that the duty of privilege is absolute integrity. And in terms of our talk here, the duty of privilege is integrity towards ourselves, towards our possibilities, and to live to the full the life that we'd love, and to animate and realize everything, because the time is so short and it'll be soon gone. And I'll finish with this short poem called Fluent. Martin said we take no questions now because he's going to bombard me in the morning with a public kind of interview. So if you want to be victimized again, you can come to that. This is a poem called Fluent. Sometimes when you'd be writing a poem, you'd get a great line or a great couple of lines. Then you'd try to follow it, and you couldn't. So I got these two lovely lines, and I tried for 3 or 4 weeks to follow them, and I couldn't. So when I was putting the collection together, I said, geez, them 2 lines aren't bad. So I exercised poetic license and broke them in the middle and made this short little 4-line poem that I'd like to finish with. And I'd like to thank you for your courtesy and attention. It's really lovely. This is called Fluent. I would love to live like a river flows, carried by the surprise of its own unfolding. I would love to live like a river flows, carried by the surprise of its own unfolding. Thank you very much. God bless you.
Yes, thank you very much indeed to John for giving us such an interesting, challenging talk. Now we have many, many possibilities, almost as many as there are people. But one is to go and order the CD of John's talk. Another is to go and buy some of his books. Another is to go and make sure that you join the Angels to support the festival. The possibilities are endless. But the final one, from my point of view, is to be back here in a quarter of an hour to hear John Davies speak here.